Hey everybody, the music that you are listening to right now is a song called Makes Me Wonder by Justina Maria Soto, which is a fairly somber take on the Christmas season. Justina recently sang on a version of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas that I put together that features the original lyrics, which are far more bittersweet than the lyrics that we know today because of Frank Sinatra's version of the song. You know, recently here on YouTube and also like on podcasts and elsewhere, there have been a bunch of people trying to figure out what makes songs sound like Christmas. This all probably got started because of last year's video from Vox, where Adam Ragusea tries to make the case that D minor 7 flat 5 makes Christmas songs sound Christmassy, which is not the best analysis. Christmas. There's obviously a lot more that goes into it, but what Christmas is and what the holiday season is and how it affects people is not always going to be reflected in the popular songs of the era. Trying to express that through music, I feel like, is an interesting thing. So if you are at all interested in that, please check out Makes Me Wonder and also our arrangement of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. And yeah, let's get started now with this Q&A, number 43. I'm your host, Adam Neely. I'm here answering all of your questions about bass and music in general, so let's get started.
Abdallah Zar writes, what is the lick, and why is it that important?
Well, you just heard the lick. I use the lick as transition music in all of my videos. It's not important, don't kid yourself. It's kind of just an inside joke among jazz musicians to the point where it's kind of a jazz meme. Somebody put together a cut of a lot of musicians using the lick in their solos or in their compositions, and afterwards it's kind of become this whole in-joke thing. Now, the real question is...
Steve Danno writes, why?
Yeah, why would I stream myself playing the lick over and over and over again? Well, it comes down to two things, really. The first thing is that I kind of wanted to do my version of Erik Satie's Vexations, which is a piece of music written by Erik Satie, a turn of the 20th century French composer, that has a bit of an absurdist bent, like most of Erik Satie's work. Vexations is a short piece of music. It's about a minute and a half long for solo piano, but there's an odd instruction written at the top of it. It tells the performer that if you're going to play it 840 times in a row, it would be advised to prepare yourself in silence and with grave immobilities. Now, it's important to note that it doesn't actually tell you to play the piece of music 840 times in a row. It merely just gives advice to you if you were to do such a thing. Now, it was never performed in Satie's lifetime and it was never published, but American composer John Cage discovered this piece of music and thought, hey, what if you were to actually perform it 840 times? What would that sound like? And so concerts were organized, and now it's been a bit of a tradition to perform Erik Satie's Vexations all 840 times. So in doing the Lick live stream, I feel like I was doing my personal homage to Vexations. This is kind of what I was thinking. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for this piece of music. In high school, I kept a running tally of how many hours of Vexations I had listened to. I was kind of an odd kid, yes, but it meant a lot to me to be able to listen to this piece of music for long periods of time. That's what you're doing right now in the background. Now, the thing is you probably did not listen to that much of the Lick live stream when you watched it and clicked on it if you happened to click on it. And when I say probably didn't, I mean, I know you didn't, because I have the analytics data and the average view time is only a couple of minutes. It's because people are more curious to see if I actually did it versus actually experiencing me do it. This is something that Mike Rugnetta of Idea Channel calls a technical meme, a low quality, high effort post, essentially. The value in the content doesn't come from the experience of it. Rather, the value comes from the amount of work necessary to create it. So a good example of this would be Neon Cat for 10 hours. You're not gonna sit there and experience the whole thing. And if you do, it's probably not gonna be super enjoyable or at all coherent. Rather, you're probably just curious to see if that person achieved what they set out to do. So yeah, modern technical meme and also an homage to Erik Satie's Vexations. That's why.
Winner Winner Chicken Dinner writes, hey Adam, bit of a weird question, but why are the extra notes on a cool chord typically an octave above their actual place in the scale? For example, a chord with the notes C, D, E, G may be notated as a C major 9 chord rather than C major 2. Why does this not apply for 6 and 7 like it was C, E, G, B? It would be a C major 7 and not C major 15. P.S. You could probably tell I had some difficulty wording this question, so sorry about that.
The way that we organize chords in terms of naming chords within Western harmony is based upon stacking thirds. And that's very important to know whenever you're trying to name a chord. For example, if you wanted to create a C major chord, you would take a C and then you would stack a third on top of that C to get an E. And then after that, you would stack another third to get a G. If you kept stacking thirds, you would get a C major 7 with a B on top of that. And if you kept stacking beyond that, you would go beyond the octave, B up to D. The process of stacking thirds is at the core of Western harmony, something that we would call tertian harmony, or harmony based in thirds. It's very important for functional chord progressions. When you do this, when you create a chain of thirds going upwards, you're kind of creating a hierarchy. The things lower on the chain better represent the sound of the chord in a functional way than the notes higher up on the chain. For example, if you took the notes C and E, that would probably better reflect a C major chord than the notes C and D. Even though D is closer to C than E is, and it's the second degree of the C major scale, when it's in a chord, we think of it as the ninth because it's a lot further away from C when you're talking about the color hierarchy of all the notes. The process of stacking thirds doesn't actually always have to be in the key. You could keep stacking thirds further and further beyond the octave to get really weird ones like a C major sharp 15 chord. That's a fun one. Or you could just not stack thirds. There is something called quartal harmony, which is based upon the stacking of fourths. And it sounds nice, but it's not the fundamental building blocks of Western harmony that we currently use. The point here is that D adds a lot of color, but not a lot of meat to a C major 9 chord, so we call it a C major 9 and not like a C major 2. The higher the number, the more color, but the less meat, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, good question.
Kyle Silver writes, question for your next Q&A. How did jazz musicians think about improvising over chord changes before the Lydian chromatic and chord scale systems? For example, it's certainly possible to analyze Charlie Parker's solos using either of these systems, but how did he think about it?
That's a common pitfall, trying to apply theory that we have today to theory that they didn't have back in the day. For example, today when you're learning how to improvise, it's common to pair certain chords with certain scales. For example, a minor 7 chord goes real well with a Dorian scale, and so whenever you hear a minor 7 chord, it makes sense to shred using Dorian. That's not how Charlie Parker was thinking at all, and none of the bebop guys before the Lydian chromatic concept came about. Instead, they were thinking a lot more classically in a way. They were thinking about the key center, so what key the tune was in, and then they were also thinking about extensions like the 9th, 11th, and 13th, and then playing around the chord tones. So if you had a chord like a minor 7 chord, it mattered what the function of that chord was in the key. For example, D minor 7 was a 2 minor 7 in the key of C, but a 3 minor 7 in the key of B flat, and you would approach each chord slightly differently depending on the context of the key. This sort of analysis will bear better fruit because that's closer to what they were actually thinking at the time.
Sachin Singh writes, hey Adam, I need your help. I'm still new to jazz and went to my first jazz jam session 2 weeks ago. It went amazing. They chose simple songs that I knew, Take the A Train, all of me. I went this week and it was a disaster for me. The songs they picked were far above my skill level. 500 Miles High, Goodbye Pork Pie Hat. Now I feel gutted. I don't know if I should still go to them or just stop and practice more. What do you think is best?
First of all, you need to know that you're not alone in this situation at all. Everybody goes through this at one point in their career, and it's an important learning process. It's an important period of growth, because when you go through the fire like that, when you are in over your head, when you feel completely gutted and you feel completely ashamed of how you played, that is the period that is most fertile for growth. Believe it or not, I know it might seem like the worst feeling on the planet, but it's how you react right now that's going to determine how you go back into the situation and how you grow as a musician and are able to deal with this sort of situation in the future, because it will happen. But just because you don't know 500 Miles High now doesn't mean that you won't ever know it. In fact, at some point in your career, if you keep going, it will be like the back of your hand. The only way that you can fail at this is if you quit right now and never get to the point that you will be able to play 500 Miles High. So set a goal for yourself. I know this is kind of arbitrary of saying 500 Miles High is the most important thing in your jazz education and your musical career, but for right now, it is. Learn how to play 500 Miles High. Make that your goal. Set a manageable goal, and then next time you're in that situation, you'll feel a lot better about yourself and how you did. There's a phrase that my teacher, Jim McNeely, said all the time, and it's ever upward and onward. You can say it at the end of any success or any failure, but it's at the end of any sort of endeavor, you have to always tell yourself, ever upward and onward, keep going. So it will get better, don't worry, and thank you for sharing your experience.
Mark Kleppinger writes, Adam, how often, if ever, do you play a 5-string bass at a gig? Under what musical circumstances is a 5-string appropriate? Thanks.
I don't play 5-string that often. I do have one, but I am looking to pick up a new one in the new year, so new gear, yay! But 5 strings are musically appropriate in a wide range of musical situations. It's just, you need to know that whenever you play notes on the low B string, it's gonna call attention to itself. So if you're playing a tender ballad, know that that low D or low C or low B might be appropriate, but it's going to say, hey, I am playing a low B right now. And if you do that at the wrong moment, that probably is not going to be musically appropriate. But it can be very effective too, which is why people like using 5 strings. So just keep that in mind.
Lukas Passmann writes, hey Adam, why is the upright bass called double bass from time to time? I've asked many professional musicians and bass players so far, yet nobody could ever answer it properly. Maybe you know the answer, and always remember, bass XD.
So I'm not sure if I can answer this properly. I can only relay what I've been told, but there's been 2 origin stories I've been fed at one point or another. The first story is that double bass is called double bass because it's doubling the bass part of the cello, the lowest instrument in the string family, before the advent of the upright bass. And so if you look at the music of Beethoven, for example, all of the upright bass parts are just doubling what the cello's doing and nothing else, and that's what they have, and good on them for doing their job of doubling the bass part. The other thing I've heard is like double bass is twice the bass, an octave lower than the regular bass voice, an octave lower than the human male bass voice. In fact, the low E of a double bass is about an octave lower than the lowest note of a typical bass baritone human male. And so this kind of goes along the lines of similar instruments like the contrabass clarinet or contrabass bassoon or contrabass sax. Any of those instruments go 1 octave lower than the respective other instrument. So the double bass is kind of like the 1 octave lower version of the cello, except kind of not really. I mean, we do read bass clef, which has been transposed up an octave, so whatever we play on the bass is actually sounding an octave lower than what we're reading, so maybe that has something to do with it. Anyway, that's kind of what I've always heard and always been taught, so hopefully that's right. Who knows?
Twanner Music writes, are you going to NAMM again this year? I want to say a little hello.
I am going to NAMM this year, although nobody invited me. Maybe next year they will. Who knows? Hint, hint. But I am going to be wandering around, making a couple videos, so say hey, and yeah. See you at NAMM.
Tomas Novoselic writes, I just wanted some fast music, not some dude talking feelings.
So even though some of my videos are fairly clickbaity, like what is the fastest music humanly possible, I definitely do not cater to the lowest common denominator in any of my analyses. I try and make them meaty. I try and actually throw some information in there that, you know, you might actually not be able to get anywhere else. And so the downside of that is I get comments like this. So if you don't like the analysis, please GTFO. That's what this channel's about. Thank you.
Tom Campbell writes, what is that haunting tension at 101? I must now how this is done.
That's a G sharp minor 7 resolving to a G major 7 by way of the common tones between both chords, which are B and F sharp, which happen to also be the guide tones, the 3rd and the 7th of both chords. So it kind of gives this sort of slidey feeling to the whole thing. And if you want to have a more in-depth analysis with actual more like context to the whole thing, I do analysis videos over at my Patreon for all of the music that I release here on this channel. I recently did a video on this particular arrangement of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, which ran about like an hour long of me rambling about a whole bunch of different things.
So whenever you have these phrases overlapping, it's called elision. Dun, 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 start spreading the news. Frank Sinatra very much popularized New York, New York, theme to New York, New York. And he also popularized this song, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas.
So if that sort of thing floats your boat, I do about one of those every month over at my Patreon. So yeah, check it out.
Gerald Fried writes, you attribute Now I Am Become Death, Destroyer of Worlds to Miles Davis. I can't say he never said it, but it is from the Bhagavad Gita and was famously recalled by Robert Oppenheimer upon the successful testing of the atomic bomb.
Now, I'm pretty sure that was Miles Davis who said that. He also wrote Blue and Green, for sure, and also Donna Lee. Miles Davis.
Anyway, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to Question and Answer Time with Adam Neely. If you're listening to this as a podcast on iTunes, be sure to remember to rate and review. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and also consider joining my Patreon because it's the patrons over at my Patreon that make this channel possible. So thank you so much, and until next time.
Peace.